Kia ora. No mai, haere mai. Welcome to our webinar on sustainability for screen production. Ko Ness Simons, tōku ingoa. My name is Ness Simons, and on behalf of Spada, we're proud to host this webinar alongside Greenlit, who are a fantastic organisation created to support the screen sector in Aotearoa, New Zealand, to develop environmentally sustainable production practices. Spada encourages our industry to embrace sustainable practices, and we hope that this discussion helps our members and others across the sector to understand what steps they can take to make that happen. Our host for the session is J9 Russell. So J9's career is in project management and PR, and includes organising the New Zealand TV Awards, the Big Screen Symposium. Her LinkedIn profile states that art is life. And from the chats that we've had so far in prepping for this webinar, I can tell she's equally as passionate about sustainability. So I'll hand over to you now, J9. I'll drop into the background. I'll be fielding questions and supporting the panel. So kia ora, J9.
Kia ora, Ness. Thank you very much. Kia ora koutou katoa, ko J9 tōku ingoa. And yes, that is J9, not Janine. I prefer J9, letter J number 9. I would just like to start with a karakia to begin this meeting. Please forgive any mispronunciations. Tūtawa mai I runga, tūtawa mai I raro, tūtawa mai I roto, tūtawa mai I waho. Kia tō ai. Te Māori tū, te Māori ora, ki te katoa, huame e, hui e, taiki e.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for joining us. I love seeing tiny round faces in rectangle boxes fizzing about sustainability, so let's get into it. Today, it's my privilege to introduce Greenlit, which is an incredible initiative of practical tools to help productions across the motu to adopt eco-friendly practices. As Ness indicated, I recently joined Greenlit as the comms and fundraising manager, and I am honoured to champion the work of this passionate team and the impactful mahi that is happening across the industry. So Greenlit launched just over a year ago, happy birthday us, with the vision of empowering our industry to reduce its environmental impact. And thanks so much to the hard work of the founders, the committee, the sustainability managers, and with support from New Zealand On Air and the New Zealand Film Commission, we have already supported over 50 productions and helped establish 15 sustainability managers who are regularly employed across Aotearoa, when a year ago it was a handful at most. So there's demand, which is fantastic. Greenlit's tools and resources are all free for you to use to make it easier for productions to minimise waste, conserve energy, lower carbon footprints, etc., etc. And some of those tools include a carbon calculator. There's a sustainability checklist and emissions estimation tool. We're also building supplier databases. We have a live donate and redistribute group on Facebook. And of course, there is a crew list of sustainability managers if you're looking to hire one or kōrero with one or more. If you haven't already, therefore, please go and have a dig and a click around our website. There is a quick start guide in there giving you literal step-by-step advice on how to implement sustainability on your productions. It is a wealth of information, and also we're all here to help. Just think of me as the cheerleader for sustainability and Greenlit in the industry. And if you have any questions, we're always eager to field those. hello@greenlit.org.nz is how you'll find me. But today we are joined by two outstanding sustainability champions. We have the wonderful Rose Archer, with over a decade in the screen industry and 3 years as a full-time sustainability manager. Rose has actually been pivotal in developing Greenlit's tools and resources. We wouldn't be who we are without Rose's input. She will share insights from her on-set experience of how these tools have made an impact in her work. We also have Ilai Amar. He is a creative producer, passionate about sustainability. Ilai will discuss his experiences implementing sustainable strategies on productions, the budgetary benefits. I know you've all got budget in your mind, so we'll talk about that hopefully, and the broader impact of collective change in the industry. Yeah, really excited to have these two on board. Thank you both. And there is an opportunity to ask questions. So drop them in the chat and we'll either address them immediately if they're burning and we're passionate about answering it immediately, or we'll do it at the end of the session. With that, thank you all for being here. Thank you for the support. Let's start greening the screen, and over to you, Rose.
Kia ora. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, J9. So hi, I'm Rose. I am a sustainability manager. I am going to talk a bit about my experience using the Greenlit tools and just implementing sustainability in the screen sector. Just starting off thinking about like what the tools are that Greenlit have and how they've been useful. One of the major tools that Greenlit has is a carbon calculator that has been made to specifically serve the New Zealand screen sector. It's also been designed to facilitate a little bit more ease of use around carbon footprinting. So a few of the processes that have in the past been very laborious are automated through this tool. And essentially, this is an iterative tool. We want to just continue to improve it as people use it. So we'll continue to automate more and more of the processes as we go and we get feedback on it and things like that. What's really great about that is it means that we spend a little bit less time stuck behind our computers on spreadsheets and a bit more time actually being able to think about, cool, so what are some of the strategies that we can do to actually reduce our carbon footprint as well, which has been a really, really awesome aspect of using this. You use the calculator by logging in through the portal, and this is what it looks like. On the projects I've worked on, have mostly really been the hands-on person who manages inputting all of the data into the carbon calculator. I work quite closely with accounts in particular, and with certain other crew members, transport unit, to get the data that I need. But mostly so far, it's been me that on my productions, me that's really managing the portal. But I really, really encourage producers in particular to have a look around at the portal, see how it works, because the more familiar that you are with it, the more that you have the opportunity to kind of support your sustainability manager and kind of just understand how these processes work. The top stuff is all just like places to put in information about the production that kind of helps to calibrate it and automate some of those processes. And then that bottom section there is where you actually put in all of the data. One of the really, really important aspects of this carbon calculator, though, and the reason why we wanted to develop it, is because it's important to us to be able to create an entire footprint for the whole of the New Zealand screen sector. And if anyone's looking closely at this slide, you might be able to tell that I had a little bit too much fun using the AI image generator when I was making these slides. You're welcome, and enjoy that as we continue to go through, because I've got some weird images in here. So yeah. But basically kind of what I'm trying to express here is that what we're able to do with this tool is that we take all of the data from all of the productions and make it all anonymized, and then we can create a baseline and a footprint for the whole screen sector in New Zealand, which is really, really awesome, because it means that over time we can actually measure our progress as an industry in New Zealand about how much we're actually able to reduce, which is just really, really important in terms of empowering our local industry with that data that can help us to be really informed about where we're putting our effort and our main focus with our decarbonisation strategies. Something that J9 mentioned in the intro was about just coming and having a look around on the Greenlit website. And I really, really recommend that producers and heads of department and even crew do that. And there are a couple of pages that I'm going to point you towards here. So we've got under the tools, you've got downloads and templates. And a couple of the key things that I think are really, really worth crew members looking at here are the Sustainability Action Plan, which is a really comprehensive guide of how to implement sustainability on your production. For any given production, the specific sustainability strategy might look quite different. And I think one of the huge advantages of working with a sustainability manager is that they will have the expertise to know where it makes sense to focus most of your attention for your particular production. But if you're a producer or an HOD or anyone working in the film industry, and you kind of just want to get a sense of what might a sustainability strategy for a film production look like, I reckon that starting with a sustainability action plan is quite a good place. It's a long document, but if you have just a look through, you'll kind of get an idea of where to start with it. And then the other thing that I would recommend in particular for HODs is to look at the departmental guidelines that we've got there. So those departmental guide for strategy and sustainable practice in the role, these also, like the calculator itself, I would say they're sort of iterative tools. So we're always looking to kind of develop them a bit more, but it gives you some ideas about what could I specifically be thinking about and focusing on for my department in particular. The other page that I would say is really, really worth looking at, and sorry, actually, I'm going to go back to that page for a second. And this is a really, really key part of what I do in my job as a sustainability manager. You know, I can do a certain amount by myself, but actually my job is to work with crew who are the experts in their specific area of the film to support the implementation of more sustainable practices within every department across the film. And one person in a department, whether you're an HOD or an assistant or anywhere in between, one person can honestly make all of the difference if they're a really, really strong advocate for sustainability. And so these are so these are the tools that we use, and that's kind of the general approach of what a sustainability manager is doing. It's really important that the sustainability manager is not trying to implement every process themselves. They need crew members to be working with them and collaborating on changing workflows. And yeah, another great area of the website to look at, and another really important area, I think, for sustainability managers is thinking about, sorry, bit tongue-tied. I've had a hot day of wrapping, which has been physical. Yeah, so on the news and events page, I would recommend to producers, and any crew who is interested in just starting to learn about sustainability, come and have a look at the news and events page on the Greenlit website. It's got some really cool articles about various different sustainability initiatives that are happening in the screen sector. And I think that this is a really, really important aspect of the work that we do as sustainability managers as well, is to share the work, share the successes, share the progress that we're making. And a question that comes up when we start to talk about this is, but what about greenwashing? Which is a really, really good question. You know, it's really legitimate. We want to avoid greenwashing, of course, but I do think it's also really important to talk about our successes and our progress, because we need inspiration and hope and practical examples of how to improve in this space. So how do we avoid it? Well, for the first part, like, I think narrowing down into a question of like what actually is greenwashing can really, really help us to avoid it. And these two images that I generated are sort of trying to create like that physical representation of the idea of greenwashing. So if you have something that is inherently unsustainable that you're doing, and you're kind of literally trying to kind of paint it green by just putting like a little bit of a spin on it, then you're in your danger territory. Then you're thinking that what you're doing might be greenwashing. So, you know, if you're trying to like talk about having green coal or green diesel, you know, those are quite inherently unsustainable things, and we can have more efficient energy. You know, we can have more efficient diesel engines, we can have more efficient coal burning plants, but ultimately like those are not really green solutions. So just having like a bit of awareness around that. The other thing that I would really flag as being problematic when it comes to greenwashing is really like big grand statements about what you're doing. So something like, this product is sustainably made, or we are a green film production. Well, like, okay, I've been working in the industry in this role for 3 years now. I've worked on a variety of different film productions where we have, you know, really worked our backsides off to try to make as much of an impact on how we're working. But I would not describe any of the productions that I've ever worked on as green, because we're just not, that's not where we are as an industry. It's just not really realistic. So with that in mind, then how do we actually talk about it? So if we want to avoid greenwashing, like this cute frog that's trying to get out of the bath here, some of the things that we can do is we can just actually acknowledge where we are. We can acknowledge when we talk about things, the problems, the challenges, the limitations. Also being really specific, talking about facts and figures. You know, it's not just, oh, we did composting. It's, we were actually able to divert 50% of our waste away from landfill with composting. And I think really, really importantly, making it so that other people can replicate what you are doing. Things like naming your suppliers, you know, so that other productions can actually do the same thing that you're doing. It's, this area is really, really about radical collaboration. You know, we're not protecting our IP. We're not kind of being like, well, I'm the best sustainability manager, so I'm not going to share how I work. Like, it's the exact opposite of that kind of approach. We want to really, really share our successes. The other thing that comes up when we think about this idea of greenwashing is sustainability on screen in the stories that we're telling. And I just really want to emphasize here that seeing people take sustainable actions normalizes care for the environment, and it can be a driver of change. So just emphasizing here things like having keep cups in your, like, on screen, using electric vehicles in your storyline, that kind of thing. Those things are a good way to promote sustainability, and I would not consider those things to be greenwashing either. And also particularly really wanting to emphasize to the producers in the room, hopeful stories about the environment and sustainability are desperately needed. We need stories that are more than just the like doom and gloom, catastrophic, everything's so bad, climate change stories. We need those hopeful stories that do highlight some of the good stuff that is happening, and there actually is a lot of really good stuff happening. So yeah, just really, really want to encourage all of the producers in the room to think about how they can support like climate justice storytelling with their work, because I'd say that that is, you know, one of the really big impacts that we can have in our industry as well. Cool. So going to talk a little bit about just like some of the specific things that I've done on different productions. I'm not what I'm talking about here is just going to be a couple of little highlights. I'm not giving a comprehensive 101 of how to do a sustainability strategy, because there have been some really awesome sustainability seminars already this year that have done a bit more of that. And also, you know, sustainability in our sector is a big, complicated puzzle, and we just need to think about all of the different pieces of it as much as possible. So that's what I'm going to talk about. So one of the initiatives that we did on one of my previous projects was to recycle our fabric scraps. Well, upcycle actually is probably a better word for it. And this was a really awesome initiative because we just reached out to a local community group called Fashion Rebellion Aotearoa that I was, you know, already in touch with through other avenues. And basically just like ask them, hey, is this something that you would be willing to collaborate with us on? And they took, it was over 200 kgs of fabric scraps and turned them into yoga bolsters, like couch cushions, all of that sort of thing, to not just recycle, but upcycle those fabric scraps. I really want to emphasize here that I think this is the sort of initiative that you get working with a sustainability manager specifically, because it's like, I think that our role is to come up with some of those really creative, slightly more out of the box ideas and use the network that we have to create a new way of working. One of the challenges here is, as it is with all forms of waste management that we do in the sustainability department, is that we did have challenges with contamination. You know, people putting food and that kind of thing into the fabric scrap bins. This is an ongoing problem, and it's something that we can use every single crew member's support to just encourage people to use waste streams correctly and just change how they think about waste. It's a resource that we can continue to use. It's not just this gross thing that someone else deals with. Something that we're doing on the project that I'm currently on is we've been working with a zero waste hub, the Glen Innes Zero Waste Hub. And basically, I'm not exactly sure what the number is, but I would say like roughly maybe half-ish of our kind of set decoration, furniture, all of that kind of thing was sourced from the Glen Innes Zero Waste Hub. And we set it up to work similarly to the way that other productions have worked with this group, which is basically that we take it, we borrow it, and everything that we return, we don't pay for. So the people at the Zero Waste Hub really, really like this way of working with film crews, because they can because often what we'll do is we'll take something that's a little bit broken or a little bit kind of dusty around the edges. A film crew will come in, they'll fix up those things, and then the Zero Waste Hub gets it back in a condition where they can actually sell that and get it back into the community again. So it's a really, really awesome way of working. There are Zero Waste Hubs all over Auckland now, and they are just like growing as we are continuing to push our nationwide strategies of reducing the amount that we're sending to landfill. So those community recycling centers and Zero Waste Hubs are an awesome, awesome resource for film productions to use. And I really, really encourage film productions to work with them. Something else that is becoming an emerging, really awesome technology in the screen sector is things like hybrid generators. Also like just the battery packs by themselves, and really simple but really, really effective and awesome is plugging into power. So some of the good things about this are there are opportunities to save, but also it can be expensive. So yeah, what I mean by that is that there's opportunities to save on diesel in particular, but some of this technology is still quite expensive. So it's not necessarily, you know, we're still approaching a tipping point with this technology where it's going to become like way more affordable than the alternatives. The battery packs in particular, so the second image here is of a smaller battery pack that has a solar panel on top, and I've heard from a lot of crew members that this is really, really awesome for their personal kits to avoid using like the smaller generators that you might just take out on location with you to boil a jug or whatever. Plugging in, we still have some challenges on our production that I'm on now. It's a smaller New Zealand production. We were able to plug into power to supplement the lighting department, but we weren't able to do all of the lighting needs by plugging in. And this is an area that I think we really just want to bring our film industry creativity to this question of how we can make more use of our grid, which is 80 to 85% renewable electricity rather than burning diesel all the time. One of the areas where we are still quite limited when we're talking about carbon specifically is transport. Transport remains a bit of a sustainability pickle. And yeah, I just again want to encourage all of the awesome creative minds in our sector to think about how can we solve this pickle? How can we what are the things that we can do to reduce our transport footprint, because it is really the lion's share of our direct carbon emissions at the moment. 3 things that you can do right now. I think I've talked for too long, so I'm gonna try to wrap it up as quickly as possible. Hire a sustainability manager. We're awesome. Do your carbon footprinting. It's really, really awesome to contribute towards that big picture decarbonization for our screen sector. And ask about sustainability when you're having conversations with crew. You know, a few great questions are, how could we do this in a lower carbon way? How could we do this in a lower waste way, or using less toxic materials? And that's me. I'm going to hand it over to Ilai now. And yeah, sorry about going a little bit over time.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you very much, Rose, and thank you, Ness and J9 for having me. My name is Ilai, and I'm a film producer based here in Tāmaki Makaurau And I'm just wanting to share some very fresh insights that I've gained in the last few months working on my first feature film with the wonderful Rose Archer as our sustainability manager, trying to give a perspective from a producer's point of view, really. But first, I just want to rewind and just give a very brief recap on who I am and where I came from, because it's sort of relevant at times. But when I was young, I kind of had the importance of looking after our natural world quite firmly instilled in me by my mum. And I was quite passionate about advocating for the natural world and giving a voice to, the environmental issues. And at the time, it was like we were still working out how to describe the word sustainability before it kind of became a big trend and then became morphed into kind of what it is now. And this was sort of before we described the climate challenge as sort of climate justice work, and it was an interesting time. And I became quite active after high school in kind of doing direct action work actually in the sector. So it's a passion of mine. I then went into storytelling in the film industry, and I spent a lot of my earlier years working with the the Outlook for Someday project, which is now called Day One, which had a focus on sustainability storytelling. And I found myself sort of fusing my two loves, and it was an amazing time. And we did a lot of great work, I think, encouraging people to tell stories about sustainability. Then when I morphed into more of a commercial producing career, which has led me now into the filmmaking I do, I sort of started to realize that the way we were making films was kind of a concern to me, or I'd started noticing some, just some kind of anomalies, I suppose, of how we did it. You could tell a great story about sustainability, but there was sort of this inherent wastefulness, I suppose, in the industry that I observed. And especially in the commercial sector, I found myself adopting this kind of mindset that it's like, the job just needs to get done. It's sort of more important to just get it done, and next time I'll use less cups or waste a little bit less, or whatever the thing might be. But it did start to kind of, it started to trouble me more and more. And then fast forward to watching Craig and Rose, form this organization, and Kaupapa Greenlit piqued my interest, and I sort of watched the journey a little bit from afar. And then now I've had the absolute privilege of making my first feature film and being able to actually engage a sustainability manager, Rose, and put into some of the practice more meaningfully, and to implement a sustainability strategy and to utilize Greenlit's resources, and notably the carbon calculator. I will just caveat though and say, it's new to me, but I think that might be useful in this forum to kind of talk to, like, how, what I mean new to me is the Greenlit ecosystem and the carbon calculator and that sort of thing. But I think that might be useful to hear that perspective. I'm not an expert. I haven't done 10 years of production and started to integrate, this stuff from way back. I'm just sort of getting into it now, but I'd love to share some of the things that I've learned along the way in the last few months. We actually just wrapped last Friday, so it's very fresh. We're in our wrapping period at the moment, but it's kind of like some of the stuff I'm still learning and emerging, and still working with Rose in this period to see what sort of outcome we can have and insights and learning we can have from the carbon calculation part of the stream of work and others. So that's me. So we just made this film. You might have heard of the weird alien pregnant feature film. That's us. Myself, along with my co-producers, Morgan Lee Stewart and Alex Whitaker, have shot. It's my first feature, but it's not their first feature. And here are some of the things that we learned. Do you want to just move to the next slide, please, Rose? It will help me. Yes. Oh. Cool, that's what I just said. Let's go to the next one after that. Sorry, I forgot that I had slides. So I think one of the things that has been most useful for us, and one of the insights I'd love to have left as a lasting impression on people, I hope, is the earlier that you can engage in this with a sustainability manager, or just by reading the resources yourself and preparing yourself, the better. We actually, through knowing Rose personally, we actually started conversations quite a long time ago, and I know there was some early conversations between Alex, my co-producer, and Rose right when we got our New Zealand Film Commission finance greenlit. That was late last year. But certainly in pre, we already had Rose on the ground even, starting to help us spin up the office and starting to work through some of the strategies, the early strategies that we were going to put in place. And I found that meant that we could have a good lead time into things, be prepared for things, but it not to feel like, oh shit, we've got to kind of get that role in place. And I suppose when you rush a decision like that, it starts to self-fulfill into what could be described as maybe a box checking exercise or something, And I would note that in our particular case, we didn't have a obligation from any funding to have this in place. But it was something that was important to us as producers. All three of us actually felt very strongly that we wanted to have this element running alongside the work that we did. And that segues into the next kind of strand or impression I want to leave, which is that we quite carefully and strongly communicated to our HODs as they were onboarded and some of our crew members that this strand of work via Rose and her work as a sustainability manager on the production was important to us as producers and to the directors. The five of us and Rose had a good session early on to kind of verbalize and talk about what the work looks like and how does it manifest in production and what can we be doing and thinking about, so that the five of us understood what was going on, and it wasn't just this thing that our sustainability manager was doing off to the side and we could all feel great about it. And I think that made a difference. And, talking to Rose, I think we can confirm that if we're setting up and signaling with people that it's important to us, they kind of take it a little bit more seriously. I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of experienced producers in the room, I've noticed, and I know there's the concept of from the top down. It is a thing, I've learned that even in the last few months, I've learned the power that you wield, even though one of the things I have learned in this process is that I feel more in the center than from the top, but anyway, that's another story. But even still, if you're in the center and you're radiating outwards the kind of the intention and the commitment, and you want to demonstrate that to others, then they're sort of following along. So that was important. We set up meetings between Rose and some of the key HODs that she described earlier in her talk. Specifically it's like unit and transport and, there's and the art department, when it comes to construction and whatnot. We set up those meetings and and really asked those HODs to be really open and come with a really good open mind and a willingness to collaborate and to really listen, not to just feel like they had to do this one meeting and then kind of get on with their work. But and because Rose had kind of given us this really interesting perspective that at the end of the day, she's there to help and serve too, not just to make them do something. And often the result is there's sometimes even budget wins and benefits. There's kind of approaches that the HODs might not have been thinking about themselves, and kind of really interesting side benefits, for the whole production and for these people who have a big job to do, and because Rose has worked on many productions now and has seen, lots of things that she can also bring as an experience to people that it can be really useful. So that's our second big one. Oh yeah, this last one is just more of a kind of example of something we did, but I realize it's very specific, but I might as well say it because we're here. But we made a call to give as a crew gift, you know, really good drink bottles, water bottles, and coffee cups, in the hope that, and they were labeled with people's names engraved in them so that people would bring them to set and really use them. Oh, no, that's right. I remember why I kept this in, and Rose and I talked about this, is because when we had this idea, we didn't just pat ourselves on the back and be like, cool, our crew gift is a sustainable thing. We actually talked to Rose about it, and she kind of gave her input and her perspective on it, which was, you know, make sure you try and get really good quality cups and water bottles, not just sort of cheap stuff that you can just get printed somewhere random and chuck it to people, because often that stuff doesn't last, it's not durable, and might end up in the landfill anyway, whereas we decided to really invest and get some good stuff. And, you know, it's a nice thing, nice win when the crew are kind of happy to walk around with their bright green alien themed drink bottles. But also it helps, you know, it helped reduce the amount of kind of waste in the production. So that's just one little specific thing. Could you go to the next slide, please, Rose? Thank you. I mean, here's a little bit that I think specific to us and our role as producers. We obviously engaged Rose and had a conversation around the role, like we would a lot of different crew members. How long you're going to work for, how many hours, how many weeks, what phases of production will you be there for, and what does your work look like in any of those phases. Additional to that, once we'd worked that out, we'd also committed a little budget for Rose, the sustainability manager, to work with while she was working, which meant that she could actually have a little bit of resource to meaningfully help some of the departments that she's engaging with, and that she didn't have to kind of keep coming back to us to enable this and kind of have to make a case each time. We put the trust in Rose to be able to give, you know, to make the decisions around that. Now, it must be said, it was a modest amount. You know, we're not a huge budget level film, but anything I think is kind of like worthwhile, I think, in this space, to arm that sustainability manager with the resource to be able to kind of meaningfully help. That also helps, I think, Rose create good rapport with those HODs. She's sort of got the goods to back up some of the talk that she's having with those people. You know, she can really like offer an idea or a strategy or an approach and kind of even back that up with, well, let's do like this, let's do that, and let's set up this system, and so we found that worked really well. And that would be one of the key learnings, I would say, I learned on this, and that I'd love to share with others. Yeah, those 2 points kind of relate, the ones on the screen, both of them. I'm just having a look to my notes. So the next two things I wanted to mention briefly were, Rose kind of touched on them, but I'll just sort of mention them. One's kind of like, I think, what I'd consider a success story from our production, and one is something that was a challenge and kind of was left a little bit unrealized to a certain extent, but I find that could be interesting to talk about. The first one was the kind of art department and construction waste concept. As Rose mentioned, we got a lot of our dressing and props and decoration from, you know, the Zero Waste Hub in Glen Innes, which was really interesting. Our film and called for it, like it worked, and it sometimes won't, and not all film productions kind of have that aesthetic, but for ours, it worked for a lot of our dressing, so that was a bonus. And even though we shot on location most of our film, we did have to construct a few set pieces here and there and a few sets. And in that element, Rose did some really interesting work with the art department to create an approach and a stream that we could either receive a good starting point from maybe a previous production like flats or construction materials. And then on the other end, we put a lot of the waste back into a kind of recycling, like a recycled construction waste stream rather than just straight to landfill. And the bonus was that it was actually cheaper to do it like that rather than to just send it to landfill, which again is like, if you can have a win on the budget and a win on the planet, I mean, you know, that's just wonderful in our minds. Yeah, double thumbs up too. So that was one of the areas that worked for us. And the other one that was a little challenging was Rose mentioned, like, we did have some opportunity to plug into house power or to the grid to leverage this, you know, the fairly renewable grid we have in New Zealand. But there's still a very strong prevailing ideology from the technicians, from especially in lighting, around the way they receive power. And you just like can't avoid these big diesel generators that you're towing around everywhere for the unit base and for your tech. And I think, like, when I think on it, you know, I'd like to take a learning from that to my next project, where we dig a little deeper and we try a little harder to create dialogue. You know, I think Rose did a wonderful job to engage those HODs, as I said. And then I think with some of them who work in more of the kind of more traditional departments, I suppose, I don't know if that's not the right word, the traditional department, but there's some departments that are a bit more kind of need it done in the way that they're used to more than others, right? And I think there we could have probably come alongside Rose a little firmer and really try to engage and interrogate the discussion a little bit further to see if there were any innovations that were present. Because the diesel generator thing is, like, you'll all know as producers, it's just a thing, right? It's like they need the reliable, consistent power to be delivered to their lights so that things aren't cutting mid-scene, or that they're not stressing out knowing the variable quality of power that's coming to them. And we didn't quite overcome that, I think, in some instances. Rose is right. There were some locations where it suited and we were able to, you know, to connect to the grid, but I think we could have done a bit more on that. So I just kind of wanted to name that as something we learned as a challenge, or it could have done better, which I think is also useful. Yeah, and then the next slide here, it kind of just sums up what I have just said. Oh, yeah, that was the one I just did. And the last one, I mean, I didn't talk for so long. I hope that you'll still remember these things, but bringing in a sustainability manager early to have good planning and meaningful kind of conversations and have the lead time for it to really be effective. Signal to your crew and your HODs, and some of them more than others, that it's a priority and that's important to the producers and the directors and the creative team. Worked really well for us. And the last one I just wanted to say, which is something that Rose mentioned too, is it's like, it can feel really big sometimes to try to do this thing where you want to make the greenest production ever, or I don't know if other people have that ambition, but sometimes I had wondered about how to make this opportunity of my first feature film and put all these things into practice, and it can feel overwhelming at times. But through Rose's guidance, we kind of discovered that doing a lot of good tried and true and tested things in the background, and knowing that Rose had those covered, while also having the discussion around what's unique to our production, like I said, in our case with the art department and construction, was kind of like, it's enough. I mean, there's a lot of other things that we do as producers, obviously, that fight for our attention, but if we know that we have these baseline things going, we can feel we're moving in the right direction, I hope. And if more of us are doing it, and then we're continually improving, then that's the way I see us winning, you know. And like I said, with that lighting generator power type situation, it's like, if we can crack that on our next one, then I'll feel like we're moving in a good direction. So anyway, I hope that was somewhat useful, an observation from a freshly minted feature film producer. But yeah, thank you. If there's any questions, I'll try to answer.
Kia ora, thank you, Ilai. There are a couple of questions in the chat. Helen is asking, do we know if any film studios use roof space to generate solar energy? Do either of you two know the answer to that?
Off the top of my head, I don't think so. It definitely is one of those things that I'm like, really feel like it should be happening. It's something that I have talked to a few people about and gotten sort of various different reasons why it hasn't happened. And it is something that I've kind of tried to push forward a couple of times before, but I think, again, it's one of these things that we just need lots of people asking that question to the right people as often as possible to kind of get to that point where it's like people are realizing that it's something that people want and that it's worth putting the time and effort into making it happen.
Yeah, I agree. Be a squeaky wheel for the planet. Squeaky wheels get greased, so let's be the planet's squeaky wheels. I am probably going to flub this a little bit, but I do know that there are a couple of chaps down in the South Island who are currently working on, if not already have, battery vans, solar power battery vans that can function as lighting source, energy for lighting. So there's a couple of, I've asked them for more information because that's the type of thing that we will share on Greenlit's website as part of news or in EDMs, or I'll just send it to the sustainability managers. As Rose mentioned, we are not gatekeepers. We want to share all of this information with all of you, squeaky wheels, gatekeepers. So Denisa, to answer your question about EVs, do any of you have experience using EVs as mobile battery units to replace diesel generators? I don't think yet. No, I don't think Rose and Ilai have yet. But again, I know that there are some people, passionate people in our industry who are working on that space specifically. So yeah.
Just to jump in very quickly on that one, I saw on a Facebook group the other day, film Facebook group, that someone basically had come about that hack quite by accident. They'd hired an EV vehicle that just required one cable and was then able to charge all of the to work all of the lighting required for that shoot at a fraction of the cost of a diesel generator. So it may be worth everyone looking into that. So it's a great question. Thanks, Denisa.
I'll just jump in because, I agree. Like, I have a domestic fascination with, electrifying, our homes and our machines, and I drive an EV myself. But, this is where it met with some kind of challenge in our production, is that it might work on some smaller scale shows or, productions if they're doing kind of smaller commercial work. But as soon as you have a major lighting gaffer truck situation, a bigger show, it's like the amount of power that they need sort of varies, right? And it's at that point that they struggle to try to put together what is this emerging technology. This kind of vehicle to load thing where you can get power out of an EV is still quite new. It also kind of will give you, the equivalent of plugging into a house one wall of the, of the circuitry. It's not quite going to work to power a big thing, but it is interesting to start to see it on smaller productions, I think, because that's the way that we'll learn more about it. But I think the little van electronic or electricity generator thing is probably the thing that sounds like the most like it could replicate a diesel generator, because it's likely that it can output what they need on the tail end. And as long as it's getting fed in either by solar or even from the house power, because to go back to the solar on the roof of a studio, if you're at a studio, you're connected to the grid there anyway. And because we're in a fortunate position to have a lot of our energy being renewable via the grid, it would be great, but it's sort of like you're already there. But the mobile thing, like putting it in a van and being able to take it on location is kind of key. Anyway.
Yeah, I think I'd like to also kind of tautoko what Ilai was saying about like trialing this technology, and add to that, not just maybe on smaller shoots, but some of the ways that I've seen people kind of starting to bring this in and trialing it is to section off certain of the power needs that we have. Because I think that actually at the moment in New Zealand, we have two major barriers to electrifying our power for film. One of them is availability of the technology. There are some really big battery packs that you can get that can power a whole lighting setup that are available like in the US currently, but we don't have that same level of power available here yet. But the other issue, which Ilai was speaking to, is like a fear and anxiety about adopting the new technology. And so I think that we need to sort of be like pushing on both things a little bit at the same time. One of the big successes that we had on a previous production that I was working on this year is just plugging into the grid at the studio. Like, it's actually so mind-boggling that we don't plug into the studio for more of our power needs when we're based at some of the really great studios around Auckland. And there are a lot of myths that fly around about the reasons why we don't do that. Or we definitely don't have the, it's not going to be reliable enough, all of this kind of thing. We did it for a massive unit base, and it did the whole production really, really well. And so I think that it's just continuing, as Ilai was also saying, again, just following on, supporting that, continuing to have those conversations, asking those questions of the technical departments. But why can't we plug in? Is there something that we could do? Could we just plug in for part of our needs? And I think that it's not just to reduce the carbon on our specific production, it's also to make those steps of culture change, of getting people to be comfortable with adopting those lower carbon strategies.
We have another question. Does sustainability get involved in making sure productions take coldie dieback seriously? Is that outside the scope? I would assume it's not outside the scope. I would assume it's very nestled in the midst of the scope, but I'm not a sustainability manager. So, Rose, can you talk to that?
Yoda, thank you. That's a really great question. The honest answer from me is that it's not something that I personally have been involved with yet on any of the productions that I've been on. One of the departments that we collaborate really importantly with is locations, and baked into the locations department is already a remit to look after the environments that we're shooting in. And I would in general tend to hope that, like, a lot of the locations managers and crews that I've worked with have been really awesome at that role of looking after the environment. And I would tend to hope in general that they are taking that kind of thing seriously, and that they are generally across that aspect of their job. Having said that, though, I know how busy all crew are and how the stuff can kind of fall off the end of the wagon all the time. And I would basically, if any crew member or producer or anyone is ever noticing that there's something that is really important like that's not getting covered, I would always really encourage you to bring it up with the sustainability manager, and kind of having the sustainability manager step into that conversation sometimes can help us to sort of lift those practices up and just bring a bit more problem solving into that conversation sometimes as well. So yeah, thank you. Good question.
Okay, and final question, if you don't mind just nodding to this, you two. Did you hand out those fabulous engraved cups at the start of the shoot? Yes, that makes sense.
That was the way that really worked. We had pre-planned it and they had the crew engraved in it, which is difficult because, a 6-week shoot, there's people come and go, and but we did our best to kind of create this nice package for people as they started on their shoot day one. And it was nice to be able to give out a gift early, like a welcome pack, and it had that bottle in it. And it was just beautiful watching throughout the different locations, all the bottles and coffee cups around, that had people's names on it, really handy too. You knew who you knew who left their coffee cup in that back of shot when we changed directions, you know, and the art department could call people out, which was kind of fun. But no, yeah, so we gave that out at the beginning, which really worked.
Yeah, I think, and it makes people feel cherished and important. And you know, when people feel cherished and important, they're going to work harder, and the production is going to be better. So I'm just going to do a little wrap up of a few key points that we discussed, even though it's 5 o'clock. I'll just zoom through it. Producers, please go and have a look at Greenlit's tools. It's specific to Aotearoa. Just honestly, the website, I could have taken this whole hour taking you through the website. Like, it is a wealth of knowledge. Get in there, click away. Every step you take is a step in the right direction, no matter how small. Okay, we're all spinning on the same rock, and so we've got to look after this rock. I said before, as Rose said also, no gatekeeping. It's a team effort. We also need hopeful stories. Brian Holland, if you're still on here, I think you're working on something at the moment, I think. Make it hopeful. We need hopeful stories. Hope feeds hope. And so we're creatives. We can come up with solutions. We can put our heads together, and we can do this. And the earlier the better. Just to tautoko Ilai, the earlier the better when you're talking about these productions. Get a sustainability manager as early on as possible. Budget for sustainability, even if it's a small budget. Like I say, small steps, small budgets. It's all in the right direction. And communication. Let's be the squeaky wheel and talk to each other and share everything with each other, because we love it. And I'll just finish with a karakia. Ki tau nā mana tikanga a te mea nui. Ki ranga e a tātou katoa. Hui e, tai ki e.
Yeah. Elder. And on that note, thank you very much for hosting us today, Jane, for Rose and Eli, for your sharing your expertise, and for everyone that attended and asked some great questions at the end. Like you said, Jane, 50 productions in the first year for Greenlit. Let's build on that with all those great resources and everyone's great intent.